Good evening. Welcome to our webinar. It's great to have you all here. We'll get started here momentarily. I just want to make sure we open the floodgates at 6 o'clock to welcome in the community for our conversation tonight. My name is Ryder Smith. I'll say hello a little bit more and introduce myself here in a minute, but we're going to give it a solid 20 more seconds for the public to make their way into this webinar, and then we'll get rolling tonight. But we appreciate you joining us. As you're streaming in, we'll get started here in another 10 seconds. Thanks for joining us tonight. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. It's great to have you here. My name is Ryder Smith, and I work with a firm called Trippepi Smith. And we do marketing, communications, consulting, and public engagement work. Really kind of one of my passion areas in life. Throughout the state of California, we worked with over 200 cities in the state and a bunch of special districts. And it's really my pleasure to get to work with and get to know the community of Monterey Park even better through this outreach work that we're doing in conjunction with the city. We'll talk about that more in a bit. Some quick logistics for the evening. So first of all, this meeting is being recorded. We're doing that for transparency purposes. And because we want to create an asset that is educational and informative and addresses community questions and make it available to anybody in the community and beyond. So they have something to go learn about and understand all the issues we're going to be covering this evening. Second thing I want to note is we are using AI translations for other languages that are available. So if you click the closed caption button and then choose a language of your preference, you should be able to select from that. And our words we're speaking this evening will be translated into your preferred language. Third, we are also going to be using a Q&A feature. So tonight is really about us doing a presentation for about 20 minutes, and then we're going to go into Q&A for the remainder of the evening. So if you have questions, you want to click the Q&A button that should be in your Zoom box. I will just note that sometimes when you look at that black bar next to the raise hand and chat feature, you may see 3 dots. Go ahead and click those 3 dots, and then it should pop up another menu and show you a Q&A icon. And if you click that, you'll see a screen that will allow you to submit questions. So those are our basic logistics. Our evening is scheduled to have a hard stop at 7:30 if we need an hour and a half. We'll have about 20 or 30 minutes of a presentation that I will primarily deliver. And then we'll get into the Q&A with a great panel of city experts from the great city of Monterey Park who are going to be prepared to answer questions this evening as we work through this project. So I appreciate everybody's bearing with me while I get through the logistics, so to speak. Okay, let's go to our next slide. And with this, I actually want to hand it over to, well, actually, I'll just note real quick. So as I said, my name is Ryder Smith with a firm called Trippepi Smith. And then I'm also joined today, they're off camera and you won't hear from them tonight, but just to know, Dana and me on my team are helping support our logistics on the back end and make sure we have a smooth running webinar and that we're trying to absorb as many questions as possible as they come in. So my thanks to me and joining our team. But I do want to introduce your city manager, Inez Alvarez. Inez, the floor is yours. Why don't you introduce yourself, talk a little bit about what you do as city manager. I know you have some welcoming comments, and then I invite you to introduce the rest of your team that's joining us tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ryder. Good evening, everyone. My name is Inez Alvarez. I'm the city manager for Monterey Park. I want to thank you all for participating and joining us this evening, giving your time to be here to engage on this topic. I did want to bring up for clarification right at the beginning that this is a city engagement effort. The city is working independently on this engagement effort with the assistance of our consultant, Trippepi Smith. We are not working with any developer or property or even in any specific one area of the city. This effort is meant to be more citywide conversation. And so I wanted to make sure that I provided that clarification before we get going this evening. And just to explain a little bit about what I do here in the city. So the city council members you're elected by the constituents of Monterey Park. And I work directly with the city council. They set, the way I like to describe it, they set the vision, the goals for the city. And I manage the day-to-day operations of the city along with our department directors to implement that vision. So they set the what, and we work on how do we implement that vision. So that's a little bit about what I do here in the city. And then I'll introduce the other members of the team. Um, we have our Assistant City Manager, Diana Garcia.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Diana Garcia. I'm the Assistant City Manager. Day to day, I sort of work hand in hand with Inez, a little bit like a chief of staff, in working with all of the department heads and the staff to make sure that everything is running smoothly, to solve problems. Every day is kind of something different. And I've got a little knowledge about a lot of things. So great to see you tonight. And I am going to go ahead and introduce Eliana Munoz. She is our senior planner, and I'll let her talk about what she does.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eliana Munoz. I am the senior planner with the City of Monterey Park. One of my big roles is to kind of review some of these larger projects that some of you all might see around the city, making sure that all of these new developments comply with our general plan and our municipal code. Some of the other things that I do are to update our municipal code, our zoning code to comply again with our general plan. So a lot of the times I might be the one that you see presenting in front of the city council along with our director. And I will now introduce Kevin Tan, who is our assistant planner.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Tan, and I'm the assistant planner here at Monterey Park. Well, I do very similar to Eliana, but more of the day-to-day stuff, such as helping review development projects and businesses to make sure they follow city rules and make sure they fit within the community. I also work with residents, property owners, and applicants on planning-related questions and permits.
Great. Thank you all very much. Thank you for the introduction.
Sorry, and I did want to note that Tim Howe, our Community Development Director, is on the call, so I'll have him go ahead and introduce himself and tell you what he does.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tim Howe. I oversee the Community Development Department, so I'm involved in everything land use, city planning, economic development, building and safety, and soon to also be involved in the city's community housing efforts.
Great. Thank you, Tim, for joining us. I know you're fresh back from another community meeting you just rushed over from. So I just want to thank you for your commitment to community engagement this evening with a double header. And I want to thank all the city staff for taking the time to join us for an hour and a half this evening to meet with our public. Particularly, we do these meetings in the evening so that folks can participate after hours, right? If they have a typical 9-to-5 office job, they can get home, get settled in, and be able to join for the conversation. So we really appreciate that. Okay. So next up, we'll go to the next slide. Thank you. So just a quick overview of our agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about what problems are we trying to solve with this Vacant-To-Vibrant effort. What is the real purpose of this outreach effort, this community conversation we're starting here that the city has initiated? A little bit of background on how we got to where we are. How did we get here? Some additional background and history on land use planning in the city. And then just some examples of what opportunities for the future may look like. Really just purely as samples and not a suggestion of something that will happen, but just giving a sense of scale and size. Because part of our goal here tonight is to help everybody capture some of the wisdom and insights of the city staff experts that are sharing knowledge and information so that members of the public, particularly those that are relatively new to local government or land use planning or development, can have some better understanding of how that all works and be active and effective participants in the public engagement process. So that's our agenda tonight. Why don't we go to the next slide? Thank you, Mia. So fundamentally, these are the things we've heard people talk about and that are areas that the city staff and city council have also identified as problems that need to be addressed. Number one, we've heard consistent expression that there are vacant properties throughout the city that need to be spurred into action for various reasons, some of which had to do with economic development and promoting economic development. That's an important factor in helping cities grow to create jobs and local economic opportunities for families and workers, as well as driving revenues for the city to help support new services and infrastructure. So we know that there's these vacant properties that we'd like to work on that are sitting idle, many for over a decade. And then number two, we've consistently heard about desires to have more housing affordability. And we know that that remains a challenge for a lot of our folks in our community. And that's another area we've heard a lot about that we're hoping to address through just broader conversations and understanding the nature and priorities of the concerns facing our community and how we can work together to address those through policy solutions that the city could potentially implement. All right, we'll go to the next slide. So, so really fundamentally, the purpose of our Vacant-To-Vibrant effort, as we're calling it, is to, number one, engage with the residents on the issues and opportunities that we're facing for housing and development in Monterey Park, right? So this is a conversation we're trying to have. And tonight is very much evidence of that, and that we want community questions that we can answer and try to get that on the record and have that available for as many community members as possible to really discuss the trade-offs and the challenges and the opportunities that exist for the city. We want to understand the effectors, what affects development, right? So what affects why a property may sit vacant for years, or why would a certain property develop in a certain way, or why there's a certain development going on that's attractive, or a certain retail property that opens up that's attractive and others who don't come into town. We're hoping that we're going to ideate on opportunities that exist and share those, either hear ideas from the public or share ideas with the public and get their kind of feedback and response on those as we go through those conversations. And lastly, we do want to just understand resident priorities, right? And that happens in a lot of ways. Tonight is certainly a part of that in terms of hearing the kind of priority questions you have. I will know that tonight, as I said, is very focused on Q&A and not necessarily taking in feedback. That doesn't mean we're not interested in that feedback. In fact, we have some upcoming in-person workshops where we'd love community feedback. And we already have an online form available on the city website that we'll talk about a little bit later. But there's a form that provides some structured feedback to us as well. That's all part of the mix of information we're looking to gather up as we engage in these conversations. I also just want to note real quick that part of really solid community engagement is actually doing scientifically valid community survey research work. And a couple of folks have noted, city staff, that there's a survey in the field going around. The quick thing I just want to note for the public's benefit is there is a scientifically valid research project going on in the city. The city's actually, it's a city-specific project. And as I always like to note, anytime you get an opportunity to use a method like survey research to interview 200 or 300 people in the community and ask them their viewpoints on a bunch of questions, that is valuable community feedback and engagement. So I'm sure the city would love to have 200 or 300 people show up at a community conversation, have some really active and effective engagement. And we kind of, survey research is a great way to go into people's cell phones and home lines and ask them a bunch of questions. So just so you know, that is taking place right now in case you're wondering who's behind or what's going on with the survey that's taking place. Okay, let's go to our next slide. So, how did we get here? Well, first and foremost, and when I say get here, meaning how did we get to launching this Vacant-To-Vibrant conversation? I think most relevant and immediate is we just had a very robust community dialogue about data centers. And although the election is not certified, all the results we're seeing are there was a very substantial community viewpoint on data centers and not desiring those in the community. That was a very direct bit of feedback and resulted in council action that prompted a ballot measure that voters were then given a chance to vote on. So, but that energy behind that conversation certainly said, okay, so we know we're against this. What else might we be for? What else could we talk about that we could use to activate spaces and create economic development, create jobs, and create housing opportunities, or do something to help spur good and effective and efficient land use in the city? Number two, there's been a history of community concerns around vacancy issues and questions that are raised about why certain properties sit idle for so long, or storefronts that are idle. And there's a desire in the city to try to proactively address those concerns and explore how we could identify innovative policies that would address some of those. We also know that there's been blight in the city, and this has been identified as an area of concern, some of which results from the vacancy issues. And finally, we know that there's zoning challenges that have maybe contributed to some of the development issues or concerns, or just generally developers or community members have expressed concerns about zoning types and issues and provided feedback. So all of that is just spurring a desire to continue a dialogue and conversation around Vacant-To-Vibrant and gathering community feedback. We'll go to the next slide. So I want to transition a little bit into the background and history here. But fundamentally, I'll just note that the Community Development Department, led up by Tim on this call as he introduced himself, is responsible for maintaining and implementing the city's general plan and the community's long-term, which is the community's long-term blueprint for growth and development. States are required to adopt and periodically update their comprehensive general plans. I've typically seen those updated maybe every 15 years, but I certainly know of plans that have gone for much longer. And there are various elements in those plans to get updated on maybe a more consistent basis. But those general plans address things like land use, housing, circulation, which is another fancy word for traffic, safety, open space, noise, design, and economic development and conservation objectives. So these are all elements within the broader general plan. In addition to, so the Community Development Department, Tim's department, and the planners that you met tonight, they're also in charge of long-range planning. So the department administers and coordinates with the city, state, and regional land use regulations to ensure that new development is consistent with adopted policies and community goals. And ultimately, the whole objective there is for the work to preserve city neighborhood characteristics, to support economic vitality, and enhance quality of life for residents. Well, so I think you can well understand, given the kind of mission for the Community Development Department, where that squarely lies around land use. Tim's a very important part of the conversation tonight. We'll probably hear most from him tonight in our Q&A, but it's important to understand the role that community development plays in the broader dialogue about land use issues in the city. Okay, go to the next slide. So I just want to also orient some terms and just provide some high-level perspective that will be helpful, I think, and educational for the community. And Tim, if I botch anything here, I welcome you to come in with your expertise, take yourself off mute and comment on it. But fundamentally, I would ask that you think about the city's planning framework as kind of an inverted triangle, moving from a broad community goals and specific rules for individual down to specific rules for individual properties. This starts with the community vision, which is the general plan. And I just provide a little bit of detail on that plan, but it's the highest level planning document for the city. It establishes a long-term vision and goals for what Monterey Park wants to do across the kind of the place that is the city. And it guides decisions around growth and housing, transportation, economic development, and community character. Within that general plan is the land use element. And that's a component of the general plan that identifies a different area of the cities could be used, right? So it might designate areas as residential or commercial, industrial, mixed use, public and open spaces. And it will generally establish development expectations around density and intensity, building heights, and floor area ratios. And a lot of that language has to do with adopting a housing element that is compliant with state mandates and regional mandates for allowing for development to take place. So some of you may have heard of RHNA, which is Regional Housing Needs Assessment. And that effort is prompted every several years to require cities to make possible development to meet their city's obligations to the broader region of Southern California to allow for housing development. So there's outward pressures and roles to play. And then, of course, as we narrow down on the pyramid, we have zoning ordinance and development standards, right? And this implements the vision from the general plan. It contains very specific regulations governing the development. It'll establish permitted uses and development standards, parking requirements, setbacks, building heights, and design requirements. So that gets into things like parking ratios and just how the massing is or how the building sits on a particular lot. And then it gets into zoning maps, which applies to zoning designations and determines what uses are allowed for specific properties. And this is, of course, these zoning maps are used when we evaluate a proposal that comes in for development to see how it matches up against the existing zoning and the rules that are part of that. So ultimately, while the general plan establishes the vision, and zoning regulations and the zoning map actually implement that vision on individual properties, and those properties are subject to the zoning. Now, in the city, you also recently meaning 2020, adopted Measure JJ, and Measure JJ essentially authorized it approved a 2040 land use element, so that was part of the general plan. And that designated areas like Saturn Park for innovation/technology zones. And Measure JJ did not give the city the ability to proactively respond to changing economic and housing priorities. And so it's this Measure JJ that is a part, certainly, of the dialogue that we're having about how we can allow for innovation to take place with our zoning and be responsive to the market. But since 2020, the economic landscape has changed drastically. And that's what we're trying to be responsive to and thoughtful about in this community dialogue we're having. And importantly, Measure JJ explicitly authorized the City Council to adopt flexible zoning regulations needed to implement the plan and improve city livability. So, but it was, I guess, explicitly constructed in that fashion. That means that it didn't provide kind of carte blanche change capability. So ultimately, especially with the Measure JJ in place, it does vest a certain amount of authority in Monterey Park voters and fundamentally in a representative government. I will just note, like, ultimately voters have final say either in elected representatives or in this particular case, have expressing themselves with their votes or ultimately expressing themselves at the ballot box when it comes to some of the land use issues as evidenced by Measure JJ. So that provides a broad framework of some of the terminology and elements that we work in that will be pertinent to some of the answers you hear later on in the conversation. And I want to just make sure we highlighted some of these key terms. I will also just note, especially given my work in over 200 cities, most cities don't have a kind of a Measure JJ tool that was used or voted on by voters. In general, land use issues are typically not reserved for direct voter vote or insights, but instead are left to the city council. And so that just is a particularly unique aspect that exists in Monterey Park that kind of makes the desire to be responsive to changing market conditions a little more challenging than other cities would have where the effort to use a Measure JJ or have a Measure JJ on the ballot exists. Okay. Did I botch that or are you okay, Tim? I got a thumbs up from Tim. Thank you, Tim. All right. So let's move to the next slide, which is just how does this all impact the city? And fundamentally, we see there's a changing environment that's affecting the city. First of all, we have state housing laws that continue to limit local discretion and require cities to accommodate additional housing opportunities. This is partly the RENA allocation I was talking about. And there's been a lot of state legislative activity to drive housing construction and oftentimes increase housing density in order to increase overall number of housing units in California, with the belief that if you increase supply, then price will come down. Second, we know that consumer preferences are changing and economic trends have altered demand for traditional retail and commercial spaces. We see more and more online shopping. That's certainly affected brick and mortar locations. And we know in commercial spaces, particularly office environments, that work from home has fundamentally changed after COVID. As I noted, the brick and mortar businesses are facing challenges with just changing habits. The housing affordability also just remains a real problem. So while there's been policies adopted at the state and the cities had to respond to those, it hasn't, I'm not sure there's many people in California who would say that things have gotten more affordable dramatically. And this remains a high priority when you look at most perspectives, and certainly the kind of feedback that city staff and city council members hear from community members concerned about housing affordability. And we also know, and perhaps even more so in Monterey Park, there's a big desire for multi-generational housing options. And those kind of options just don't significantly exist in the mix of housing options in the city. We've also heard from younger residents and adult children who are facing barriers to being able to stay in the community. So even if they don't want to live in a multi-generational house, but they want to live within 5 minutes of their parents or their grandparents, that's proving more and more challenging as Monterey Park is an attractive place to live. And then ultimately, we know that we're facing a challenge with cities who want to balance preserving community neighborhood character, right? Because people listening to this who live in the city, they moved to Monterey Park for a reason and live in Monterey Park for a reason. But at the same time, we need to respond to changing housing, economic, and community needs. So all these pressures are affecting us. And what we're trying to think about is how we can remain competitive and responsive in the marketplace, how we can flex and be proactive in evaluating existing land use issues and regulations so we can meet community needs, be responsive to where money wants to invest, and spur and address economic development that addresses some of the vacancy concerns we consistently hear about. All right, we'll go to the next slide. So, I just think about when talking with city staff to get ready for tonight, because of all the conversations we've heard in prior efforts for community outreach, in survey research that's been done, in the recent discussion about data centers, like there's been lots of community discussion. There was a Saturn Park committee specifically that looked at that area of town. there's certain things that consistently come up that city staff and city council hear about. Number one, we want to provide we'd like to see how we can provide economic opportunities to enhance our community character. Right. So that's spurring development that builds new commercial spaces and shared spaces and experiences for the residents that are consistent with kind of Monterey Park values. Number two, related to that is how do we expand local services, right? How do we get either more coffee shops or more recreational activities or entertainment experiences or things along that line that expand services for residents? Third, there's a desire to see local jobs, right? How are we creating local jobs that are a short commute for people to arrive at, or otherwise just create good job opportunities for our residents? Additionally, as I noted, we consistently hear about housing affordability issues and concerns. And then finally, questions are consistently being raised about how do we position the city to respond to these changing market conditions and state requirements, knowing that we're kind of stuck at times between a rock and a hard place between what the market wants to develop and what some of the state mandates are that are coming down in the city to be responsive to those. So those are the things we've heard about. But we'll go to the next slide because we also are not we listen to the concerns that are raised too, right? So while those are things that people would like to see addressed, they're simultaneously have expressed to us that they want to ensure the development occurs in locations appropriate for additional growth, right? Not just willy-nilly everywhere, particularly around concerns about preserving established residential neighborhoods and community character. So as I said, you live in Monterey Park for a reason. How do you balance change or investment in certain areas while also preserving your day-to-day lived experience in your neighborhoods or your apartments or your condo units? There's concerns about how we maintain our adequate infrastructure and public services, right? So increased population and population demand demands more services from the city. How do we make sure that is economically viable for the city and supportable so we can maintain service levels for the community at large as we continue to add population? It's certainly a common thing we hear in a lot of the communities I work in, and we've heard it in Monterey Park too, is we know that population and housing growth can have impacts like on traffic and parking. So we want to be thoughtful about it. How do we address those concerns? Or what are those trade-offs and what do those look like? We know that community engagement is a big part of the conversation. We saw a lot of community engagement recently, particularly around the data center discussion. But we also, just at the meeting Tim was at tonight, right, there was a desire to get a city expert there to answer questions about potential development that's being discussed. So, and we're here tonight recognizing that the community wants to be brought along for the process and conversations. And this is understandable, right? Your built environment around you as a city is what you experience when you live in Monterey Park. It defines the part of the Monterey Park experience. And having the community along for that ride and being sensitive and receptive to feedback is important. And then finally, I think what we've heard is the city there's a desire to make sure the city isn't just in reaction mode to the kind of ongoing flood of state mandates for housing policy, but instead is trying to carve out a proactive stance of how to go build the community that is envisioned by the city as opposed to the community that is envisioned by the state of California. And so part of that is to have a proactive, constructive conversation with our residents about those exact issues. All right, let's go to the next slide. So this map is really just highlighting areas that we've heard from residents that there is too much vacancy, or they view it as opportunities for areas where investments can be made and where changes would be helpful to activate property or see a reinvestment in property take place. So these are kind of, as noted by Inez earlier, this isn't about any particular area in the city, but based upon prior community feedback, these are the broader areas we're particularly thoughtful about and what kind of policies and ideas might help further change direction around vacancy rates and activate and result in better land use in these areas. And then if we go to the next slide, you'll see there's a pretty good correlation between those ovals you just saw on the map and where our commercial mixed use, innovation, technology, and corporate center areas are. Again, this makes sense. That's where our vacancy rates are going to be most concerning and where people would expect to see services. So we kind of view these as the potential investment areas where we want to ensure that policy flexibility and ideas are creating an opportunity for reinvestment in those community areas to drive down vacancy rate, increase better utilization of the land, potentially create housing opportunities in those areas that will actually further spur services because there'll be a critical mass of shoppers and retail customers in those areas. So these are the areas that are kind of up for discussion, right? And when we think about those areas, you may more commonly know them as Garfield Village, Garvey Corridor, Mid-Atlantic, North New Avenue, Saturn Park, South Atlantic, Monterey Pass Road, and Corporate Center Drive, for example. So these are the areas that, at least based upon what we've heard in the past, are up for conversation that we'd really like to focus our efforts on. But again, tonight, and as we get feedback, I should say, from this process, we certainly remain open to what other areas should be up for consideration or discussion. Go to one more slide. Now, I asked that we put this slide in here, and I want to just be very clear. Oftentimes in my experience talking with the public about housing density and what that looks like, planners and developers will talk about things in terms of density per acre, or how many units per acre does development look like. And so I would just note that as we have conversations around mixed use development, which might be commercial on the bottom and housing on top, like in the Americana example, or lower density residential development, like the top right corner there with a 2-story unit development, or higher density 3-story condo development at the top left. I believe that might be a project example out of Covina, or traditional but smaller lot single family residential development. These are all just examples of what different housing types may look like. And as we engage in our community conversation, I think just to help people understand what development may potentially be, and to understand some of those trade-offs around density, we're going to want to make sure we provide examples to you for your consideration, so you can either drive by those at some point and experience them in San Gabriel Valley, or at least appreciate and understand what it means to talk about letters and text on a document, and understand what that vision actually becomes. So these are just some examples I'd asked staff to pull together to help exemplify some of these development opportunities. Okay. So, and I'll just note finally, we can go to the next slide. I'll note finally to you that as part of, we have the recording tonight, and all the slides will be recorded as part of that. We'll also render a PDF of this PowerPoint deck and make it available as a link on the city's website that's dedicated to this entire Vacant-To-Vibrant conversation that we're having. But I've now done about 25 minutes of talking, and it is time to turn to you and give you a chance to ask questions. And we have some questions that we know are already commonly asked that I would like to be able to address tonight with our city staff and take advantage of that. And then I have other questions that have been submitted throughout the conversation this evening as I was presenting. So I appreciate everybody submitting questions. Just a reminder that if you are not seeing the Q&A in your black bar on your Zoom, that if you click the 3 dots, you should be able to then see a pop-up, and the Q&A feature will show up. You can click that, and then you'll see a box where you can type your questions, and we will direct those to city staff. So I guess I'll turn to my first question that I see popped up here, which is, how do we make sure REITs, which are, let's see, I think REITs are basically investment funds that are used to invest in real estate. So I think they're real estate investment trusts, if I recall correctly what the REIT stands for. Foreign and domestic, don't buy up all the affordable housing and turn it into rental apartments. Tim, you want to tackle that question?
Sure. Thanks, Ryder. I think there's a couple elements to that question, so I want to break them down into their simpler components. So there's a first portion of this is about a concern over real estate investment trusts purchasing either deed restricted affordable housing, or just housing that is more affordable within the city. As a really interesting question, and I know it's very timely in 2026. So there's not a simple answer there, but ultimately there are a number of different mechanisms that cities are looking at, some ranging from ultimately policy decisions that cities can implement that do regulate or do limit ability for real estate investment trusts within the city to acquire property. That's certainly one avenue that could be looked at. Others are, as projects come forward, looking at arrangements in terms of those private developers either having something like first right of refusal for nonprofits, or the city to potentially be first in line if the original owner wanted to sell it. Things in that range. But there's a number of different creative ideas that are being kind of discussed right now. I know it's a very timely concern. The second piece of that question was really related to what's the ultimate outcome that would be the negative impact of that potential outcome, and that being that you see housing developments become dilapidated. That concern is addressed a bit separately, actually. And the city has affordable housing monitoring programs where we do conduct inspections, and we have inspectors that go out and do regular inspections of these housing developments. Frankly, go into units. 2 Fridays ago, I was riding shotgun on inspections that were occurring in housing units within the city, of going into the units and seeing, what the condition was, are there repairs that need to be made, et cetera. So that we do have mechanisms, and most cities do have those types of mechanisms in place.
Thank you, Tim. Appreciate the answer. I can already tell we're going to have a lot of questions that are going to come to you, but I think maybe this next one might be a broader policy question for Inez. And this question is asked by the name on screen is Moose McGillicuddy. So Moose asked the question, how do we outlaw Airbnb? Inez, do you maybe want to comment on that? That's a policy decision from the city council, I would assume.
Sure. So yes, short-term rentals are allowed here in Monterey Park, like Airbnb, VRBO. We do have a process in place for short-term rental operators to get a permit. Those permits are actually issued through our community development department. We are working to try to get more of those short-term rental operators into compliance to make sure that they have the proper permits. We are also looking, based on City Council's direction, at potential additional restrictions around short-term rentals and Airbnbs. I don't believe that the council at this point has directed any policy discussions around outlawing or, not allowing, banning those types of use for short-term rentals. But the city is looking at additional restrictions for short-term rentals, and that should be coming back for a future council discussion very shortly. So we are looking at additional restrictions. Like I said, there is a permit process in place for short-term rentals, and our community development department would be the most appropriate to work through if somebody is an operator and interested in becoming an operator. They could reach out to the community development department for more information.
Okay, great. Thank you, Inez. One more question for Moose. This is my first time I've ever had a Moose on a call like this. I'm going to go with it tonight. The question is being asked, why can't council members have this discussion with us? And by us, I mean the community. So, I certainly have thoughts on that from a public engagement perspective, because this isn't the limit of the conversation to have, but I'll let you go first on that, and then I might supplement your answer.
Thanks, Ryder. Okay, so the City Council they are planning to participate in or be at the future in-person workshops that we have coming up in later this month. So want to make sure that I do note for the public that those meetings are Tuesday, June 23rd from 6 to 8 at George Alder Community Center, and on Wednesday, June 24th from 6 to 8 at Langley Center. Again, the information is in the Cascades newspaper and also on the city's webpage, on the website calendar, on the city's landing page. So our council members will be available to listen in on dialogue during those conversations. And I believe that there's opportunities for activities and engagement. Those meetings will all be held in person. So I encourage everybody to participate, and the council will be in attendance for those meetings.
Yeah. And I'll just say from my experience as a communications professional that council, first of all, the great thing about local government is usually you can run your city council at the grocery store or church or at a park event and whatnot. And they're typically always ready to have a conversation, understand what's going on, assuming they're not in the middle of a personal family moment. A, B, the because it's local government, they're generally ready to have those conversations, and they're just generally more accessible to be found. It is also important to have other kind of constructed and constructive conversations that are designed to make sure we are extracting out some good feedback and questions, and doing that directly with staff experts is a very common thing to get done. And that's exactly the kind of initial communications we're doing here. So really, I would kind of define community engagement being multiple vectors, multiple ways to make that happen. This is one of several that the city is engaging in. As we noted, there's a community survey going on. And I'm sure there's these additional forums where council members will be observing and hearing some of the dialogue. And then I'm confident if you want to go up and talk to one of those council members during the appropriate time during those meetings or afterwards or before, they would love to chat with you about your ideas and thoughts on housing policy or the whole range of issues we're talking about today with zoning. There's a question, Dave asked a question here, which is, why are we focusing on drive-to areas that increase car dependency instead of developing walkable communities? It's a big, Tim, why don't you give us your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I don't know that we necessarily are. Now, apologies if that terminology was used earlier in the presentation. We're absolutely interested in developing walkable communities. So we're certainly, I mean, right on the screen right here is an example of a mixed use project. We would certainly be cognizant of the fact that we are it is still primarily a car dominant culture in Southern California. And although we've seen a lot of progress, frankly, I'm a biker myself. I bike as many places as I possibly can. That's not necessarily the reality for everybody, but no, we're absolutely open to opportunities to really drive this discussion where the community members want to go. And if that is really looking at more walkable opportunities and future development, we're happy to get that feedback.
Great. Thanks, Tim. And then there was a following question that was also asked, and this is kind of more focused about zoning as a general law, right? So the question asked is, can Tim or one of the planners comment on contemporary planning research that, at least some of this research in this case, shows that zoning laws are archaic and are actually a significant cause of the problem? So, maybe that question is a little bit of both a declaration of what the perspective is on zoning laws for this person, some studies, and maybe your comments about the pros and cons of zoning law, the risk of it turning into a PhD lecture on zoning policy.
As much as I would love for that to be the outcome for the next hour, I'll be brief, and if any of my colleagues want to chime in, they certainly can. So this raises a really important point, which is that zoning historically has sometimes gotten it wrong. We've looked at some of the long-term implications of zoning and the impacts of redlining on racial discrimination over time. We're seeing a lot of cities, it has become in vogue in the last several years for some communities, particularly urban communities, to look at eliminating single-family zoning. The city of Minneapolis is one prominent example. And there's certainly been a push within the planning world to look more at form-based codes rather than what's traditionally been utilized. And yet, you also have areas like the city of Houston that essentially have no zoning, and yet are seen as quite a success story right now. So I don't know if there, frankly, is a perfect solution, and I don't know that a solution that works in another community necessarily is the right solution for Monterey Park. I think we're very special. I think Monterey Park is very special, and but part of getting to that best solution is really this type of engagement, hearing from multiple stakeholders, and really thinking thoughtfully about what we want to vision the city for. And this land use discussion is going to inform that.
One follow-up question for you, Tim. Could you just explain real quick, if you can, is it possible in 30 seconds to explain form-based codes versus zoning codes?
So form-based codes, in a nutshell, I'm going to butcher this. Essentially, when let's say we're looking at the building that we see on screen here, where rather than dividing what's allowed by use by geography across a community, you're really looking at does whatever you're proposing fit within the footprint, the regulations in terms of height, density, etc., that allow it to fit into the form that would match what essentially your neighbors around you that are deemed to have to be within that same sort of form. That's in a nutshell. So the end outcome is you could have some commercial use right next door to a residential use, right next door to perhaps an R&D type use. And so it's not geographically segregating the uses, but really looking more at the form of your communities and having congruity in that form.
And to be clear, such changes in policy and whatnot are ultimately something that goes through city council in a massive process. So it's not like, Tim, you can decide tomorrow we're going to do form-based zoning, to be clear.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Just want to make sure the public comes along for that ride. You're not suddenly proposing a brand new, totally different way to do these things. Tammy asked a question here, which is it feasible to implement a vacancy tax on empty commercial units? Like if they've been vacant for a certain amount of time, like 6 months. Diana or Inez, do you guys have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can answer part of that. And if Inez, you want to chime in at any point. Is it feasible? The short answer is yes. But I will talk a little bit about some of the difficulties that we've seen with vacancy taxes. So we've been looking at this. It is something that we have explored. And we've done our research into other cities that have implemented vacancy taxes. So as the title implies, vacancy tax is a tax. So the first thing that we would have to do in order to implement that is we would have to put it on a ballot. And it would have to be implemented by the voters. So we've seen in other cities where they've proposed vacancy taxes, there can sometimes be strong opposition from the business community to these vacancy taxes. They definitely organize and come out. In cities where they have passed these, some of the hurdles include implementation. It can be a little bit difficult to decide because we would need staff going to each business and doing that on a regular basis to decide who is vacant, how long they've been vacant, and then implementing the tax. So on a very kind of practical basis, it can get a little bit tricky with that. The council has discussed it. It's been a topic that we've looked into. We also want to make sure that we're balancing implementation of something like this with the needs of the business community. So for instance, if we had something like this on the books in 2020, well, we understand there were a lot of business vacancies during that time that was, probably not any fault of their own. So we need to be a bit flexible if we were to implement something like this. So Inez, I'll let you chime in if there's anything else that you want to add to that.
No, I think you covered that well. I think that is a tax would need to go to as a voter initiative, since it would be a tax. But I think you explained it well, that it is possible. It's just it can be tricky on facilitating how to implement who is taxed based on vacancy. Vacancy meaning empty land or empty storefront, and then time constraints with that. And then having to think about monitoring vacancy from the standpoint of if a storefront has vacancy and is working on plans, or even vacant land, a developer is working on plans, does that qualify as in the process for development? And so that makes it a little tricky. So appreciate the question.
Yeah. As with most things in life, it's rarely black and white. There are some nuances to things, but I think this is the kind of questions that get surfaced that we're getting a chance to record this evening and make a part of the conversation. So I appreciate Tammy asking that question. Brian has a question here, which is, does the city have plans to place a measure on the ballot in November to give them the flexibility they need to address vacancy rates? And
Thank you
maybe you could start with that.
Sure. I'll take that one. Thank you for the question. So ultimately, that would be a council decision to make that determination about a ballot initiative. We're definitely here to hear community input and feedback on certain vacant commercial areas and to see what the community is interested in doing to address that. If the need arises through that policy and these discussions with engagement that requires a ballot initiative, then the council could definitely consider that. There's no determination at this time whether or not a ballot initiative, would be considered for November. But as you're going through this engagement process, could there be considerations for that as an option? Yes, that could be an option, but ultimately that would be city council decision.
And I guess another way to think about that too is there really nothing's off the table, so to speak, because we're trying to have a wide open conversation. Is that fair?
Yeah, that would be exactly that. That'd be fair.
All right. Thank you, Inez. Appreciate it. Greg asked a question here, which is, as the city develops to meet the need for business opportunities and housing options, how would this impact city services such as police, fire, animal services, code enforcement? Will we need to increase the staffing requirements? That sounds like a great city manager question. Inez, maybe back to you.
Sure. Thanks, Greg, for that question. You are absolutely right on track. As developments are being reviewed and considered, definitely if developments come in, there is times where maybe city services will need to be increased. We definitely have involvement with reviewing plans and projects. Fortunately, it feels like we've been able to manage developments that have come in. We have in this next budget cycle for next fiscal year, there is a plan to add additional 2 officers to our police department, keeping up with the times and the need. So I appreciate that. It all varies depending on what's being proposed for development. I wouldn't say every development requires, a potential need for more city service, but there could be developments definitely as population potentially grows for us to continue to maintain service.
If I may, I'll quickly just add to that. Developments, as part of their development, they are required to pay into development impact fees. And so those go to help supplement funding for these various city services.
And notably, right, Tim, they're one-time fees, so they can't really provide a sustainable operating budget, but they can provide for the initial capital infrastructure impacts. And typically those impact fees also pay school districts for building out facilities for the school districts that need to expand capacity if there's anticipated children coming with the development and things like that, right? Okay. Thank you for clarifying that point. Here's another question that we get all the time, and so we're going to ask it now, which is, how does the city get a Trader Joe's or an IKEA to come to this city? We know we get this all the time. Tim, what are you going to do? Are you going to go sit on the front step of Trader Joe's corporate and demand that they open a Trader Joe's in Monterey Park?
So IKEA, that's an interesting one. Those are very large stores. So Trader Joe's, yes, love this question. I've worked in communities in the past that have had Trader Joe's. I've worked in communities in the past that have not had Trader Joe's. And the brutal reality is that Trader Joe's decides to go where they want to go. They have their own internal metrics and making that determination. When it's extremely rare that a community will lure a Trader Joe's. However, in the instance, or that a developer can even lure a Trader Joe's into their development. When they do, however, the ask is immense. So the cold economic reality of it is that Trader Joe's can choose where they want to go, and oftentimes, frankly, they can choose how much rent they want to pay, or how much they want to pay to purchase a property. Um, we've absolutely had conversations in my brief time in Monterey Park, and the feasibility right now is really looking for a site that would be suitable. And then, frankly, they would be looking for someone else to foot the bill to build a building for them. So they'd be looking for, a $20-30 million corn shell building to be built for them, ready to move in. So absent that, it's quite challenging.
And I part of my understanding of this, and partly this, we're speaking a little bit to economic development, which you heard a lot about during the presentation. So let's just dive down this rabbit hole a little bit. Among the factors that Trader Joe's is going to look at is they're going to draw a dot on wherever the theoretical store is going to be, and they're going to draw a radius around it, and they're going to look at a bunch of socioeconomic factors that drive whether or not that's going to be a viable store. So in many ways, like even if you have all the right incentives, if it doesn't have the right mix of their kind of formula for what they know wins, they just don't choose to show up. Now, part of the point of what economic development is in cities is to explain that data, explain what the future looks like, explain how special consideration should be given for cities. A lot of cities participate, and sometimes cities in San Gabriel Valley jointly participate through the San Gabriel Valley Economic Partnership and an organization called ICSC to help represent cities and encourage development, and go to the developers and the retailers and urge them to take a look at their cities and represent them. So that's broadly falls under economic development. But I think the bigger message beyond IKEA or Trader Joe's is it does speak to the point that proper zoning and also just the nature of the socioeconomic factors within a radius of a given property has a huge impact on what kind of economic development takes place. And that's an active process that cities engage in all the time. But the developers in the private sector are kind of deeply in charge of whether or not they're going to even take an interest in the city before they show up. And anything I said there you would disagree with, Tim?
I would double down on what you mentioned there. Trader Joe's in particular, they look for communities that are like absurdly overeducated. They certainly look for, as all grocers do, they look for a radius for trade area. They look for income levels. But one of the things that stands out is like the education levels that they look for. It's quite interesting.
Yeah. Side note, there's some excellent Trader Joe's documentaries on YouTube. I urge you to check them out. They're very interesting. All right. Next question I have here is, and this may be a little bit redundant, but maybe we'll turn this particularly to housing development. But how does a developer decide to build in a city? What attracts them to build in the city? And we talked a little bit about building for retail space and commercial, but maybe you could also talk about that from a housing perspective, Tim, with your thoughts.
Yeah, and I'll try to be brief. Essentially, they're looking at market. If it is a for rent project that they're looking to build, then they're looking at what the market rents are in that local market, and they try to be as hyper local when they're looking at the market as possible and get as granular as possible. When they're looking at a for sale project, they're looking at what the market is for sale properties that are similar to what they're proposing. And then on the feasibility side, they're looking at costs. So a big driver is construction costs. To some extent, they're looking at what entitlement timelines and construction timelines are, but a lot of it is driven by just hard construction costs and especially financing costs. Frankly, all of which are trending in the less affordable direction over the last couple of years.
Driven either by inflation or by interest rates primarily?
A number of things, sometimes geopolitical conflicts, all the above.
Yeah. Okay, we have 2 questions here, so I'm going to smash them together because this is adjacent to the conversations we're having right now, Tim, and it's going to come back to you. So I'll take a sip of water. There was a question asked about what sort of incentives exist for small businesses as opposed to larger foreign corporations to develop in vacant areas. And then Jesse asked a question, which was, what are the mechanisms for the city to attract specific types of development? What has been most effective for Monterey Park, and what are the most promising prospects for the future? So I think these things are a little bit tied in together, and I want to just give you a chance to speak to that. And maybe, I'm not sure if Inez or Diana also could speak to economic development stuff. So please jump in on Tim as you see fit.
Yeah, I can start with the first part of the question about incentives for small businesses. So we understand in Monterey Park that our really economy is a very mom and pop economy. We've got a lot of great stores and restaurants that are considered small businesses. If you recall, we just modernized our business license tax, and that's something that all businesses in the city of Monterey Park and the other cities have them as well, but that they're required to have to operate. And so for us and for our city council, it was really important that we were not disincentivizing businesses by having to do that. And so one of the things that we did when voters passed that new rate is the city council went and waived the business license tax fees for the first year for small businesses. And that was for businesses that were making $500,000 or less every year, which is, I think, almost the majority of businesses in our city. If I remember correctly, it is a huge number. The other thing that we do is we've got a whole economic development division. And those staff are really working with our local businesses in a variety of ways to offer them education, workshops, access to grants. We also have a small business assistance program, which is a forgivable loan that they can receive to buy things like furniture for their building or to do upgrades to their building. And so really, I think, there's a conception that every city is able to offer a lot of financial incentives to developers to build. And I think while that certainly does happen in some bigger cities, in the city of Monterey Park, we need every penny we have. So we have a lot of needs. So there aren't necessarily financial incentives being given to people, but where we can support them and offer them breaks, that is a huge priority of the city council. And we have staff that work very, very hard hand in hand with businesses to help them address all of their needs.
Great. Tim, any additional comments about, I guess, attracting particular business types or any prospects in the future?
Yeah,
they're probably confidential, so you can probably only say so much.
I'll certainly touch on, promising prospects. Certainly, we've got some opportunities where, I'll just use one example, Saturn Park. Obviously, that's an area where there's property owners down there that wanted to do one thing with the property, and that use is not moving forward. And so there's certainly some large properties down there that are certainly maybe attractive for uses from alternate uses. So part of this exercise, obviously not just centered on that part of the city, but really looking holistically across the city and seeing I think everybody can visualize a vacant property that they know of in the community. And here's an opportunity to see what can the city do from a land use perspective to promote the market of potential businesses and developers out there to be interested in reuse and revitalizing those locations. So it's part of this process is to really see what the menu of opportunities can potentially be. As Diana mentioned, there are limited mechanisms that a city like Monterey Park has, but rest assured, my background is frankly economic development more than anything. So I come from the old redevelopment agency days, and those are long gone, thanks to the state of California. So we don't have those mechanisms that even existed, 15 years ago. So it's limited. However, we're looking at every possible opportunity to attract that type of development that folks want to see. And I know we often look at neighboring communities We look at areas like areas of Alhambra, which benefited from that prior era of redevelopment agencies and the tools that existed at the time. So we'll look at opportunities that exist. I know there's some communities that are successful to limited respects using things like infrastructure financing districts. So everything is on the table in terms of looking at options and can they help Monterey Park.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate that extensive answer. And for some, rip to the redevelopment agencies, right? Those were a big deal in a number of communities. I have another question for you. So take your sip of water. Can the city outright deny any project? What are the state limitations on city control of local control?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a very literally answer. The answer is it depends. It depends on what type of approval the applicant is requesting, and in what role is the city playing on that? Is it a legislative decision or what's called the quasi-judicial decision? And what type of project is it? I think what the question is getting at is what Ryder mentioned previously, which is that certainly over the last several years, at the state of California level, there's been an increasing trend of preempting local control over land use decisions. So all cities are increasingly seeing that the magnitude and scope of local control is shrinking, unfortunately.
Yep, I hear this very consistently and have found myself working on projects like this based entirely on kind of that risk to loss of local control, the impacts of state policy. Inez, I have a question here. Greg is asking, if Garvey Avenue is developed for mixed use purposes, which was shown in one of the diagrams, will existing businesses need to be demolished to develop the area?
So I'm not, I apologize, Greg, if I'm not understanding perfectly which slide you're referencing or in the presentation that you're referencing. In general, and if the other team members might have caught on, jump in, but in general, if a property owner where a business is located is interested in redeveloping their site, then yes, oftentimes they may consider demolishing the business to revitalize and propose a new project. So along Garvey Avenue, there are several proposed projects where that is being proposed by that property owner to demolish what's existing and redevelop it into something else, mixed use opportunity. So yes, that would be the case. I'm just not sure what specific property or area that you're referring to, but in general, that would be the case. And just for clarification, these properties are privately owned. So the decision is really not the city's to make. It's really the property owners to make, to determine if they like to revitalize with a new type of project. So hopefully that clarifies that. Apologies if I misunderstood the question.
I think the question was focused around when I showed the zoning map, which is just the one prior slide here. And if Mia, if you could actually go back one slide, two slides, my apologies. I think it was right here. So some of the purple areas where we're looking at mixed use development.
Understood. Then, so then to answer that question, just more, again, more specifically, it would really involve the independent property owners and their decisions to potentially revitalize their property if they choose to. Property owners are not interested in that, then oftentimes the property will remain as is. There is some vacant opportunities there. And so definitely we're working to encourage development in those vacant sites along the corridor.
Yeah, I think the one other thing to note about that too is typically speaking, there's a lease agreement between the occupant's business and the landowner and the building owner. And as a result, there's some duration on that lease and some foresight into future plans. So oftentimes developers have to plan years in advance for when they might be doing a redevelopment of a property and tearing it down. And there's ample kind of foreshadowing for businesses that that's probably going to be taking place. Okay, next question I have here is, can't we just turn vacant lots into parks? Inez.
Thanks, Ryder. Again, thanks for the question. Vacant lots, even though they're vacant, have private ownership. So if the property owner is potentially, maybe they're investigating into potentially developing that site or proposing a project. Some developers take many, many years to develop a site. Unfortunately, they're not ours in ownership, so we can't just take over the vacant site and develop it into parks. In addition, we love our parks. We love our green space. Parks do cost the city maintenance to operate and maintain, and so we would be mindful of those types of taking on those types of projects as well. But yes, in general, we don't own a lot of the vacant sites in the city. I would tell you, all vacant lots, even though they're vacant, have owners. So, and they're not the city. They're not the city that's the owner. So that's the answer.
Does the city actually own any vacant property in the city?
Not any vacant property. The city has open space, right, parks, but not vacant property.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting you consider a park to be a vacant property, but in terms of like, I guess just to be clear, like when people see vacant parcels around town and they're not just maybe an open space or landscape space that's maintained by the city isn't otherwise sitting on a treasure trove of properties that you're waiting to sell off and turn into development, because that obviously would be worth millions and millions of dollars, and there'd be a whole bunch of different conversation happening.
Correct. Yeah, the city does not have any vacant lots.
Okay. All right. Let's see. So follow-up question for you, Inez, which is, Bosco asks, what does the city staff recommend for Saturn Park?
So I think city staff is recommending to engage with residents to understand what residents are interested in seeing there. So we're here to help facilitate those conversations, take back feedback back to our internal staff for discussions and our council for recommendations. But ultimately, I think more than anything, our recommendation, the several sites down there, I'll speak to 1977 more specifically, that site has been vacant for many, many, many years. And so I think more than anything, our recommendation would not be to just continue to have vacancy in the space, but to have those spaces be proposed and revitalized with projects that the community is interested in seeing there as well, so that they don't continue to just sit vacant, deteriorate, become blight in our city. We definitely would love to see them thrive into some type of usable, purposeful development. So our recommendation, as I mentioned, is to work to facilitate those conversations and try to come up with solutions that the community is open to and that can work for the property owners as well.
Okay. Follow-up question. Oh, actually, another question for you, not related to that question, to be clear. But Anonymous asks a question: any possible planning to utilize some of vacant commercial properties for temporary homeless shelters? I'm sure for some that is a very touchy question, one way or the other, right? This is complex. Go ahead, Inez.
So there is no proposal or discussion about commercial properties being utilized for temporary homeless shelters. There's not that discussion happening at the city, I don't believe, and I'll lean on Tim just so that he can confirm. I'm not aware of any even inquiries that we've gotten about that type of proposed project.
I'm not aware of any.
Okay. Another question from Bosco. Great names tonight. In your experience, how likely is it that HMC will sell to a developer? This is speculative, so I'm not sure we can really answer this question. Tim, do you have any thoughts?
That's certainly that's a likely outcome if they don't, seek to redevelop the site for a use that would be compatible both for the community and for the city.
And compatible for the developer too to want to do something.
Yeah.
So it has to be in their sweet spot, I would assume, like what their specialty at developing. So, but to be clear, it's all speculative. The city doesn't have any particular insights into that plan. It's privately held, privately owned property.
Yeah, I have no unique insights in their plans.
Okay. There's a very specific question that was asked here as well, which is, and again, maybe we can't answer this question, which is okay, but I at least want to ask the question. Why weren't the property owners in Saturn Park offered incentives from Monterey Park to subdivide their properties and make them useful for .com companies like the Like Dreams handbag business at 2001 Saturn? So that's the first of two questions related to that. First of all, I guess I don't want to assume that we didn't offer incentives, or at least there was a discussion around that, but maybe there wasn't. Tim, do you have any? And maybe you weren't around for all that too. I kind of sense you're relatively new to the city, but
yeah, I'm not aware of any conversations in that regard. I would point back to the discussion about, like what incentives do, local jurisdictions have to incentivize major development, something like this on that scale, hard to say. I also am a big fan of the Like Dreams, company that is based here. So I'm right there with you on anything we can do to, help that business be successful. So yeah, unfortunately, that was not a discussion that occurred.
okay. And then maybe just a technical detail question is Saturn Park now mixed use zoning and no longer innovation technology, or is it still innovation technology because that's what was adopted in the housing element that the community adopted with JJ, but data centers have been carved out as being allowed in the city?
So I'll just quickly clarify that. So in terms of the land use designation for the Saturn Park area, that is innovation technology. That is that, as mentioned, was adopted via Measure JJ in 2020. That remains the land use designation. The zoning underlying that is the Saturn Park zoning. So hopefully that clarifies that.
Okay. So I guess the quick answer is it's got these two layers of zoning on top of it. All right, thank you. And then a question from Brian about are there plans to integrate more green space into revitalization efforts? And I'm going to just assume green space here means more landscaping, more breathing space, maybe setbacks or whatnot into revitalization efforts.
Yes, so it'd be great feedback if that's something that, city's current development standards, we want even more. That'd be great feedback. Or are the open space requirements that the city imposes on private development too onerous and deterring development? Obviously, that's a different perspective. If that's the perspective, we'd love to hear that as well. So we'd love to hear everybody's feedback on that. Thank you.
I think, Tim, you also just raised an interesting point about confronting some of the trade-offs that exist with that exact discussion and part of the dialogue we want to have in the community. Because, for example, if you want open space set-asides as part of housing development, it inherently makes the housing development more expensive because they can't produce as many housing units to divide the cost of land and gain scale on the property. So you get more open space, but it might increase the per unit cost. Whereas if you reduced your housing open space requirements, they could put a couple extra units on there and it would give them an ability to reduce their cost per unit because they have more scale. These are just natural economic questions that come up. And, frankly, I think that's part of having this conversation about Vacant-To-Vibrant is understanding some of those trade-offs that exist in the marketplace and working to talk with the community about what our priorities are to make things happen. Let's see. A couple questions for Inez. We're going to spare Tim for a bit so we can recuperate. Brian asked, do tax revenues from increased development often offset the cost of increased services needed?
So thank you for the question. Yes, they could offset. The costs are two major tax revenue streams that help support city services by going to our general fund. Our property tax, that's the number one revenue stream that supports our general fund, that supports city services, and also sales tax. So if there's tax revenues generated and it's new tax or higher taxes because development is coming in, then that absolutely can help offset the costs for city services, correct?
And so by way of example, on property taxes, if a new development comes in, they exchange, the property sells, and then there's a trigger event to reassess the property, and the value goes from $1 million to $3 million, then theoretically, under Prop 13, they would now start paying the higher assessed value, which might be a 200% increase or 300% increase in property tax generation from that particular property.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's and this is why we're having these discussions, talk about, these potential opportunities, because underutilized space in our city, as I mentioned before, not only are they eyesores if they're sitting vacant, but also we might be missing out on some of these opportunities to support city services in general. So we definitely would appreciate the conversation to figure out if this is something the community is interested in as well.
Yeah. And then another question for you, Inez, which is, if we do increase the police department, will there be dedicated officers for traffic control, especially since they would be, there might be an increase in traffic as a result of more people in the city?
So if a development came in where we think additional city services are going to be needed, we would evaluate that. We are always evaluating our city services to make enhancements where we think we have maybe more needs or we're deficient. A lot of our calls are related to medical actual calls. So we have a high number of medical calls that both our police and fire respond to. But definitely understand the question. It would depend on, if there was a need for a specific type of officer. In general, when we're looking to expand public safety, we are looking to, as I mentioned before, keep up, making sure that we're maintaining service. If we're able to enhance service, it's even better of an option for us. So I would say it depends. It might not be specifically a traffic officer, but if we think that there would be a need because we're seeing some kind of traffic, that needs to be mitigated or managed better, then that could be an option. But in general, as I mentioned earlier, we're looking to add 2 police officers this next year. Those 2 police officers will be sworn and they can have assignments, but in general, they would also be supporting the larger department as well.
Okay.
And I'll just add, and maybe I misunderstood the question, but I do want to note that there is already dedicated officers in our traffic division. And so that is certainly something that we're already doing. In addition to that, there are also other ways to mitigate traffic in the city. And so some of those we're implementing already, like signalization changes that are smart signals that can detect traffic. So they can be green for longer, red for longer, so that traffic moves through the city in a better way. And some of you may have attended our Garfy improvements workshops as well. And so there are some changes that you'll probably see as a result of that process, specifically in the Garvey corridor, things like pedestrian improvements, traffic improvements, and others.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. I just want to note we're almost at time. We got about 6 minutes left, so I'm going to go quick hit with some questions here. And as this question was already kind of answered in your comments, but I want to revisit it because I think it's an important point. Is the city doing Vacant-To-Vibrant effort on behalf of any developer or particular project?
Thank you. Yes, for clarification, and I definitely want to reemphasize the city's engagements efforts are independent. We are working with Pepe Smith, which is a consultant for the city, but we are not working with any specific property owner or developer. And for this engagement effort, we're not looking at just one area of the city. As we've shown on the map, we're looking at multiple areas of the city because we want to make sure that we're definitely having dialogue around commercial areas that have some vacancy. It's not all of the areas that have high vacancies. Some have higher vacancies than others, but in general, we want to have conversations more citywide about land use opportunities. So, but this initiative is really the city's initiative independently.
Okay. And then a question that has come up or was asked in a couple different ways tonight. And this I'll turn to both Tim and Inez to discuss, which is, didn't voters already decide on land use with Measure JJ in 2020?
So the short answer is yes, but so yes, voters approved the land use element update through Measure JJ back in 2020. Like was already discussed, that had implications for areas like Saturn Park. So what's happened since 2020? We've lived through a global pandemic that had lasting impacts on how people live their lives, that had a lasting impact on how people work. It had a lasting impact on how people shop and do virtually everything. While some things have reverted back to how we did things before then, quite a few things have not. And so even a vision that was set out, throughout a visioning process that began in 2018, 2019 into 2020 to now in mid 2026, is the city seeing the fruits of that vision at this point? So, at best, the answer would probably be sort of. And so this is that opportunity to look at that and say, hey, now that we know what we know, right here now, what do we want to look to as far as the future and the ability for, especially, is there an opportunity to enhance flexibility and looking at, greater allow flexibility in uses in other areas of the community.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Tim. I appreciate that. Inez, do you have anything else you want to add to that answer?
No, I think Tim covered it. Yeah, Tim covered it pretty well.
Okay. Tim's been the man of the hour tonight with a lot of the answers. So good job, Tim. All right. And I'll ask one final question here. What kind of public engagement happens when a development is proposed in the city? What qualifies for a public process? Maybe Inez or Tim. I'll ask one of you guys to answer that.
I'm sorry, I missed that question.
Sorry, no problem. What kind of public engagement happens when a development is proposed in the city? What qualifies for a public process? By way of example, I would say, I'm assuming you have ADU rules that allow for ADUs in the city, but you don't do a public hearing on ADUs, would be my presumption. They're probably by right, and you can just go to the planning department and make that happen. But at some point, there's going to be a public engagement process when development X is being proposed. So kind of what triggers a public engagement process in a conversation?
Yeah, great question. What I would actually say is we'd love feedback from the participants here and throughout this process to help inform that. So one of the lessons from the last 6 months of land use discussions in the city has been, and frankly inspiring from a planner's perspective, is the level of community engagement and people that understand and want to talk about zoning and land use and development standards and, oh my goodness, CEQA and impacts. So really inspired regarding that, and really really inspired to know that people want to know what's happening in their communities. So you've probably seen, close to 10, if not close, community meetings related to different proposed projects over the last couple of months. And as mentioned, I was just coming from a community meeting for a proposed project elsewhere in the city earlier this afternoon. So that is something that, frankly, that's the feedback we're providing to applicants now. Is that codified in the city's code? Not yet. So we'd love your feedback on what is the appropriate level and for what types of projects. Because right now that is not necessarily codified, absent projects and the requirements to conduct a public hearing when they go before planning commission and or city council. And those will trigger, depending on the type of entitlement they'll need for their project, public noticing requirements, so mailers that get noticed out, and as well as posted in the public places. So absent that, anything above and beyond that, we're seeking feedback on.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that final question and great answer. Before I proceed forward, Inez, do you have any closing comments you want to make as city manager? Not to put you on the spot, but I always want to defer to the chief executive officer of the city.
I definitely want to take a moment to thank everybody for their participation. We appreciate all the wonderful, wonderful questions. If by chance we misunderstood your question or didn't get the answer that you were quite looking for, please reach out to us. City staff very available. We try to be accessible to the public. So if there's something that you feel that we misunderstood or you want a more dialogue about, please reach out. And that brings us to this last slide. I just want to encourage all community members to share the word, share with your neighbors and your friends and your networks that we have these opportunities for in-person engagement. We're hoping for a great dialogue like this and continued engagement back. Like I said, our council members, we're planning to have our council members present at these next two meetings so they can hear the feedback directly. And so that would give an opportunity for community members to engage with our council members as well. So again, appreciate you taking the time away from your busy days to be here with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Inez. I appreciate that. And I'll just conclude too. Like, we had excellent questions tonight. We were really good participation. So you guys should be proudly rep for Monterey Park. This website on here, montereypark.ca.gov/vacant-to-vibrant, has a bunch of background information. We'll probably be adding some more frequently asked questions there based upon the great questions we saw tonight. There's a feedback form there. So I know I talked a lot about feedback, and tonight was about Q&A. It wasn't about direct feedback, but that form is a great place to start. And obviously these two upcoming in-person workshops, we look forward to hearing from the public at those events as well, and really having you have a chance to have a conversation, not only with city staff, but really with your neighbors about some of these trade-offs and issues. So please come out and participate with us. We really look forward to that opportunity. This is right up my alley, and I look forward to getting a chance to meet you all. Just a reminder, this recording is going to be made available on that website. If you're listening tonight, that means you're probably a super nerd when it comes to local government, which probably means you're active on Facebook groups or maybe next door as well. I would encourage you to go to your neighbors and share this website, and maybe get them to convince them you spend the hour and a half or maybe 45 minutes on 2x speed to watch this video, just so they can get up to speed with you on all these great conversations we're having about how we go from vacant to vibrant in Monterey Park, because I know from social media experience that can really drive a whole community dialogue. So with that, I want to thank the city staff for taking the time tonight to join us for the lengthy conversation, and thank Monterey Park for showing up, and thanks to my team for helping support. And you all have a great night. Thank you.